One of the reasons that I was so anxious to teach this graphic design course for everybody is it's wonderful when you feel like you can take control of your own visuals. It's very empowering, and it's wonderful to be able to create professional looking visuals to get more business and keep the business that you've got. So we're going to start out with logos. A logo is really your visual signature, if you will. That's how it seems to me, your visual signature. So we're going to talk about logos that have graphics in them. We're going to talk about logos that don't have graphics in them. And then we're going to create a whole bunch together today during class and put them into use on business cards. So the first ones that we're going to talk about are those that have graphics in them, or mainly graphic based. And you might have seen these guys. So we've got Apple on the left, we've got Twitter in the middle, and then we've got Nike on the right. These are some of the best examples of graphic-based logos that you'll find around. They're very simple, they're very clean, and as a result, they reproduce really well at small sizes, which is also important. If you think about all the different places that you'll use a logo, it may need to be pretty small if you need to have it on letterhead, or there's so many situations where it would need to reproduce well at very small sizes. Business cards, too, are pretty small, okay, so about 2.5 inches by 3 inches or so. So these are some of the best logos around. You'll notice that 2 of them also infer motion. Okay, so if you look at the Twitter logo in the center, that bird is tilted up just a little. Its body is curved in such a way that it infers action. It infers flying or taking off. So that's kind of an interesting thing. The Nike logo as well infers a little bit of movement or motion. So these are some of the best ones around. Now I do need to say we're not affiliated with these guys at all. I'm just using their logos as for illustrative purposes. So these are some of the best ones around. Now if you can't draw graphical elements like that yourself, of course you can purchase them from stock image companies. The thing about doing that is while the different stock companies have different policies on if they allow the usage of their illustrative art to be used as part of your logo. The folks over at iStock Photo say that the art cannot be recognizable in the form you use it as its old form. So it has to look very different from the original art that you download, okay, for you to use it. And then you can use it. The folks over at Fotolia are okay with using their illustrations in your logo. However, you cannot trademark it or register it. Okay, so that would be the caveat to that. So if you can't draw some kind of a graphical icon like this, then you can always purchase it. But do realize that unless you change it and it doesn't recognize what it used to look like at all, then you just can't trademark it. But is that a big deal? I'd say no. We talked about that a little bit yesterday, and unless you're on the same level as some of the logos we looked at a moment ago, Apple, Nike, those kinds of things, you're probably not going to need to trademark it. Where that comes in is if you think there's somebody else in the market space that will try to make it look like they're you, or that they are your product. So if that is not a big concern for you, and I'd say for photographers, it's probably not, really, and that's just my humble opinion, I wouldn't worry about it too much. That said, you can always put that little TM that stands for trademark next to your logo anyway if you don't go through the process of trademarking it. Basically what you're saying when you do that is, hey, this is mine, don't take it. Kind of sends that message. Now whether somebody will still rip off your logo, that's, who knows about that. But for photographers and most businesses, smaller to medium businesses, I wouldn't worry about it so much. Now, this is not the class for advanced theories and principles for branding experts and art directors, okay? Obviously, this class is called Graphic Design for Everyone, so I'm not talking about big companies, okay? So if you're doing a big branding campaign for a large company, then there are different concerns, okay? So we're talking about making your own designs for your own companies and your own products, All right, so this is an example of some of the art that you can download from fotolia.com. And what I did was I just typed in camera, and I made sure that I turned on their illustration database. So I got back vector artwork, so artwork that's been created in programs like Adobe Illustrator or Freehand. And so it's not photographic, okay? So these kinds of things would work well in your logos if you would like. So just a little bit about that. So no matter how much I would love to do it, I could not trademark or register this logo. I could use it. I think it would be great for a heavy metal concert photography business. I would really like to do that. So this is an icon from iStock Photo, actually, the one on the left. So I could trademark the name part of it, the text part of it, but I could not include the little hand, as much as I would love to. So now let's talk a little bit about typographic logos. Typographic logos are actually my favorite kinds. They are timeless. You don't have to worry about the style of art that you use in your logo going out of style or looking out of date. Typography is timeless if you do it right, and we learned so many principles yesterday that we're going to put into practice today, and I think you'll be amazed at how easy it's going to be for you to produce beautiful typographic logos for yourself and for other clients. So let's take a look at a few of those. One of my favorites is FedEx. It's clean, it's simple. I'm not positive what font this is. It could be an Arial, rounded situation. Can anybody see the movement that's being inferred in this logo? Anybody in the studio? Raise your hand if you... Susan, do you see the movement?
Yes, there's an arrow.
Very good.
I think there might be more than one arrow. Is there more than one arrow?
I think there's one.
Okay, there's
one. As Susan wisely pointed out, there is an arrow, so look between the E and the X. And it's beautiful, it's natural, and it's subtle, and it's so perfect for FedEx, because what do? They move packages. So inferring movement just typographically is quite brilliant. Okay, so you would recognize this logo anywhere. And that really is the point of having a logo like this, is brand recognition. So you want people to know who you are, recognize it when they see it, and trust it. We talked about visuals are what people use for their first indicator of trust. So this is a nice, rounded, happy, friendly font. Okay, so it's happy. It's clean. Okay, it's also thick, so you get a sense of stability, boldness, you know, like FedEx is going to be around a while. Nice big thick fonts tend to send that message. So this is one that I really love. Another one that you have probably seen is the CocaCola logo. Okay, now in this situation it is extremely important for them to be able to trademark and register this, because you don't want to be drinking some other product that has a similar logo, because it wouldn't be the same thing. This one is interesting because it's a custom type situation. So somebody probably drew that and then created it. So it could either be something that you've drawn and then digitized. So custom text is not something that anybody else would be able to come up with, because it's something that you've drawn. Or you can take a font and you can customize it yourself. And we're going to take a look at how to do that a little bit later today, and you won't believe how easy that is. So even if you don't want to go the route of creating a completely custom text situation like this, all you have to do is change the existing font just a little bit. So start out with a font. You can turn it into outlines in Illustrator or Photoshop, and then you can tweak certain parts of it. Now, this logo is fake for the maintainers, but it might look similar to a movie franchise that was quite popular called the Transformers. Okay, so the Transformers logo that's copyrighted by Paramount Pictures and Hasbro, all the designer did for the movie posters was what I've reproduced here on this fake logo. And that is, they started out with a font, they turned it into outlines, which means they turned it into an editable piece of art. And all they did was they grabbed the little bottom of the M and they dragged that descending part down, and they clipped it off at an angle, and they did the same thing on the T, and that's it. So it's very easy for you to do this kind of thing in your own logos. So we'll take a look at how to do that today as well. So this would not be nearly as difficult to create as the Coca-Cola logo that, like I said, was either drawn by hand and then created as a piece of art, or was some kind of custom, text situation that they had made for them. So we'll take a look at how to do this file. And that's just a texture that I added in there. It's actually a picture that I downloaded. I think that one came from iStock Photo. So that I just clipped the texture so that it's being pushed through the text, so it makes it look like it's made of metal. I thought that was kind of clever. So transformers, what's the opposite of transforming? Maintaining. The maintainers. I have to entertain myself somehow. So this is another custom text logo or a custom type logo. So we're talking about fonts that have been tweaked. So you start out with a font, turn it into a piece of art, and then you customize it. So this is one that my husband Jay Nelson made for a very special couple, very special friends of ours, Ben Wilmore and his new wife Karen Wilmore. So Ben does some teaching here at CreativeLIVE. And we wanted to make a logo for them as a married couple. And we have our own logo. And so what we did was we took a B and a K. We looked for a font that kind of resonated with them. And they have a vintage bus that they live on, and it's quite curvy in its nature, rounded. And they just, the roundness just kind of fit with them as a couple. They're very happy. So we looked for a round font, and we found one, and we turned it into outlines. And then what we did was we flipped the B, and then we tucked it over on top of the that first part of the K. And then we made, because that made it too thick there in the center once we overlapped those two pieces. And then we just made that center piece thinner or narrower, okay? And then we took the K and we tucked that in a little bit, so kind of squished it just a little bit. And once we were finished, we had something like this. So put it inside of a circle, and we made a lovely business card for them and presented it to them, and they just loved it. So now they have a business card to give out, for their personal married life, which was really neat. So we'll take a look at how to create this logo in class as well. Some of the simplest logos, however, to make are typographic in nature. And as you can see here, I just used my own name, one of my names. And I quickly came up, like in the span of about 30 minutes, with 12 different logos. These all exude a different feeling, a different message. So let's talk a little bit about them. The one at the top left, so we've got good contrast going on here, because Nelson is so small in comparison to the word photography. Okay, that's good contrast. The reason this works so well is because there is such a huge size difference. If the word photography were a little bit smaller, it wouldn't work as well because there wouldn't be enough contrast. And contrast is one of the principles that we talked about yesterday. And I shared with you that it was oftentimes my most challenging. It's challenging sometimes to build in enough contrast because you really do have to be brave. It kind of gets you out of your comfort zone. So you need to be able to go large with one of the words and very small with the other word in order for that to work. Now, it's the exact same font. It's that one is Futura Light, and the Nelson part of it's about 38 point, and the other part's about 82 point. So there's quite a big difference between the sizes of those two words. And we're going to take a look at how to create these as well a little bit later on. So let's move down one. And also, when you're using Futura, which is what at least the first two in the first column are based on, it's a very round, happy font. So you get happy feelings, and it's clean and clear and trustworthy and visually pleasing. So the next one down is based on the same font, so Futura as well, but using a bold version up next to a light version. That also builds in contrast between the thickness of the first word and the thinness of the second word. And that's what allows you to shove them together where it looks like a single word, and that's why it works. Okay? But if the Nelson, if that were any less bold or weighty, then it would not work against that thin font. So The contrast part of this is really, really important, and you need to be brave and be willing to try out even black versions. So a black version of Futura would be a little bit heavier in nature than the bold version. Okay, so it may be a little bit uncomfortable, might make you a little bit squirmy, making, say, photography in the first logo at the top left that big may be a little bit uncomfortable for you, but the contrast is necessary for it to work. So let's keep going down. So the script version, so we're looking at the third one down in the first column. This one is a bit more classy, it's a bit more elegant. It exudes a feeling of grace a little bit. So it all just depends on what resonates with your target audience. What kind of customer do you want to attract to your photography business or whatever business it is? It really is worth spending some time thinking about that. That doesn't necessarily mean that the clients you have are the clients you want, but you want to design to the clients that you want. What kind of visuals resonates with that person? Do they need something very clean and clear? Do they need something that's cursive or scripty in nature? So the script version here on the left, third one down, no surprise, that's my favorite font, Audios Script Pro, is the open type font that we looked at yesterday. And if you highlight the N, then you could change it to a different contextual alternate, or one of those swash examples that we saw that had the extra flourish on it, just to kind of pop this up another notch, or like Emerald says, kick it up a notch. So the script at a large size works very well, even though it's thin in nature, and the word photography underneath it is also thin in nature. But again, what makes it work is that the script is so different from the plain version underneath it. And I believe that's also Futura Light underneath the script there. I love Futura Light. Well, the whole family of Futura is just fabulous. You can get so much mileage out of it because it's got a light version, a bold, a black, a semi-bold. I mean, it's just wonderful. So what makes this work is the size of the script, against the smallness of the lowercase letters of photography. And I've also added some tracking here. So photography has been spaced out a little bit. Now let's talk about the one at the bottom left. The bottom row is really type stacks. And stacking type in this way works incredibly well, and it can be engaging. It gives you a nice, strong focal point on whatever visual that you place this on, whether it's an ad or if it's a business card. Since the type is kind of stacked together and kind of weighty, then it'll draw the eye right to it, which is great. And even though I've rotated the word studio so that it's kind of tucked up against the right-hand side of Nelson and Portrait, it's still very readable because studio is a short word. So if photography needed to be that piece that was rotated, it wouldn't work as well because that's a longer word. So if you're going to do this kind of little rotation, stacking, or you can think of it as building blocks, it's kind of what it feels like. Because I tried to kind of nestle it in, you'll notice how the S in studio kind of tucks into the space that the T creates at the end of the word portrait. Can you guys see that? How it's kind of tucked in there a little bit, but they're not overlapping and touching. So this can be a fun exercise. And for that one, you really would need the text in, you'd need at least 2 text boxes if you're doing this in InDesign, or a couple of different type layers if you're doing this in Photoshop, because you need to be able to rotate studio. You can get away with Nelson and Portrait on the same type layer or same text box, but you'd have to do a separate one for studio just to rotate it. So by experimenting with size and these different words, again, 3 words, right? Not 4, because 3 is more visually pleasing than 4, okay? Then you can play around with the sizes and just kind of see how the type blocks can fit together naturally. So I didn't know exactly how that was going to fit together until I started playing with it. And then I saw the S and the T and I thought, oh, that's pretty cool. Oh, yeah. And it's exciting. It does wonders for your confidence and your self-esteem when you can create these kinds of visuals that you are assured are sending the right message for your company. It feels really good. It feels like you're taking control of it and you're on top of it, and that's good. So now let's talk about the second column. So we're back up to the top of the screen here. This one, so we've got Nelson at quite a large size paired with photography at a very small size. Again, we're building in contrast in the weight of the fonts here, thick versus thin, as well as initial caps with all lowercase. That's giving us an extra boost of contrast as well. So this one would almost make me think that he was a newspaper photographer, right? Because of the font that we used here. That font is American Typewriter, and it kind of looks like a typewriter, right? We talked about that a little bit yesterday. So you can see how these are sending messages and communicating. So you need to think about what message you want to send when you're choosing your fonts. So that one would definitely make me think newspaper photography or reporter, okay? The second one down makes me think of somebody who shoots outdoors, because the font, which I think is Caslon Antique, but I'll tell you when we get into this file and start creating these things. So a couple of things are going on with that one. So we're in the second column, second one down. It's a distressed font, which means it has a little bit of texture in it. Okay, actually the edges are a little bit uneven. It makes me think outdoors. It makes me think possibly Western. It's also angled just a touch, which gives it a feeling of roughness or edginess. All that's just coming from a font. I didn't customize this font in any way. I didn't turn it into outlines and do anything to it. That's just the font itself. So you can see the power that fonts can have. So we've got contrast again, not only in font weight, so the thickness of Nelson compared with the thinness of photography, but we've also got contrast in the use of initial caps for Nelson and all caps for photography. Okay. And this time photography is not tracked out. And I use the same font. So Caslon, I believe that's what that is. Caslon has several different styles within its font family. So I just used a version that didn't have that distressed edge on it. And it pairs very nicely with Nelson. And we've also got contrast in the slight rotation of Nelson between the perfectly horizontal photography. So let's look at the next one down. We've got, again, thin paired with thick. And which word should you do in the thick weight or the bold weight? Whichever one you want to stand out just a little bit more than the other. So since there might be a lot of Lesas out there, I felt that the last name in this particular logo needed to be weighty, so that's why I bolded or used a black version style for Nelson. And again, so we've got contrast between thin and thick, and then we've got contrast between the size of the Lesa Nelson block and the photography word, and it's also tracked out probably using Future Light as well. Now the next one down, I have squished together with leading. All right, so we talked about that yesterday. Leading is the control that lets you manage the space between lines. And if you go into the negative leading values, then your text will start crashing into each other, and it can be a useful design element. Now, if these words were any longer, it probably wouldn't work as well. But it works because these words are short. So if your words that you're using for your logo are relatively short like that, then you might try this squished together negative leading look to see what it would be like. So let's hop up to the right, top right of the slide here. So again, we've got contrast in thick and thin. Everything is right aligned. This logo might make me think children's photography. It's kind of happy and round and approachable, doesn't feel formal in any way. So that works out. We've also got, it's all lowercase, so that's very approachable. Don't be afraid to use lowercase. Lowercase is in vogue right now. It really, really is quite popular. Now the next logo down, so we're in the third column, second one down. I love this font so much. Does it look familiar to anybody? Anybody in the studio? Todd's shaking his head yes over here. This font is based on Star Trek. Yay! And it's called Federation, and I cannot tell you where I got it from, but I have it. And it's very bold, and doesn't it exude motion? Doesn't it feel active, just the way that logo is? So that's another look. You know, it kind of conveys the feeling of fast, young, full of energy, that kind of thing. So the contrast is coming in here with size. Okay, we've got similar weights, though because Nelson is so large in comparison to photography, it looks like it's weightier, but it's really not. It's the exact same. There's only one style of Federation font. So, and then I reduce the leading so that the two words are crashing into each other just a little bit. And when I add color to this, and we're going to do that a little bit later on, then you'll see the top of that word photography is laying on top of Nelson just a little bit. So if we did two different colors for those two different words, then that would be a really neat effect. So again, it's all about what message you want to send. The next one down is really spaced out or tracked out, as designers would call that. This one, to me, exudes a feeling of grandeur and spaciousness. Very, very responsible, very trustworthy, very classy. You know, I probably want to dress up. They probably don't take a lot of kids' photos. See how the messages kind of come through? So this font is called Copperplate, and it's a great one because it's kind of narrow, so it's really great for spreading out like this and making it very wide. So what I did is I set it in all caps, and I just added a lot of tracking to it to spread that out. So our contrast is coming from the size of Nelson in comparison to the size of Studios. And so Nelson is set at about 45 points, and Studios is about 20 points. So there's about a 20-point difference there in the type sizes. And again, it's the contrast. If you're going to get it from size, it has to be extreme or it won't work. Okay, so when we're creating these a little bit later, we're going to look at that. So I'll show you the difference. So we'll make Nelson kind of big and Studios a kind of little, but you'll see that the contrast won't quite be there, and you just need to go bigger. That's the bravery. That's where that comes in, is you got to be brave. A little bit uncomfortable. Is that too big? Probably not. It's probably going to work just fine. The next one down is set in, I think that may be Helvetica Nui, and I never know how to say that word. But anyway, it's a very thin, very clean, crisp, austere font, and I would probably expect to walk into that studio. So we're talking about the one at the bottom right. I'd expect a lot of stainless steel, to be honest. I'd expect the studio to be very crisp, very clean, white, not a lot of comfort, not a lot of cushions hanging around, kind of, minimalistic. So the contrast here, there's not a whole lot of contrast, but if we put that logo on a business card, and that business card had quite a lot of white space around it, that would be your contrast. So the contrast would be between the block of text and then the free space or the negative space. But it's very clean, very clear. I'd expect that to be family friendly, happy, friendly, approachable, probably affordable. I would expect the one at the bottom right to be more affordable than the one above it. See what I mean about that? So you can send a message about your rates as well. What's the other one in here? What would you expect the other more expensive studio to be in these examples? Anybody have any ideas? Todd?
Yeah, I think the most expensive studio would be on the left-hand column, the third one down.
Yep, the script, definitely. Yeah. Isn't it fascinating, all the different messages that you can send with these things? And most of these fonts are on your system. Most of them have been installed with the Adobe programs. If you've got any of those, you've got some of these fonts already. And if you purchase the course, you will get this file as a layered Photoshop file. So that will help you re-engineer some of these things that I've done for you on your own, even without having to go back and watch this particular segment, which you could do also if you purchase the course. Does anybody know why these are all in black and white, why we don't have any color going on? Anybody want to take a guess on that? Yes, Bill?
You want to make sure that it's printable or usable in a variety of ways first. Also in black and white, you can see better the balance that you've been talking about and the contrast between the elements, and then you can add color later if you're going to print them for color.
Absolutely. So we can see if the contrast is there, if enough of the contrast is there. The big thing is that if it works in black and white, it will work even better in color. So if you can get something that you like in black and white, and I always start out in black and white, then if you're happy with it there, then when you add color, you're going to be even happier with it. So always start out with black and white, no matter what you're designing. I add the color last, okay, after I've, set the text for that. Another reason is that it is likely that you will use this in newsprint. Pretty likely. This lets you know that it's absolutely going to work in newsprint. Okay, so all of these would work well. The only one that I'd be a little bit scared about putting in newsprint, but I think it's large enough it would work, is the one on the bottom right. And that's simply because the letter forms are so thin, and newsprint has an absorptive quality, and you just wouldn't want the characters to kind of get lost on the newsprint. Okay, it's just paper. So when you're designing ads for a magazine or a coffee table book, or tomorrow we're going to design some branding for a photo book, a portfolio. When you're doing that kind of thing, you know that you're going to be using what's called coated paper. And coated paper just has a quality to it that keeps the ink from absorbing into it. Okay, so you don't have to worry about the ink kind of bleeding out a little bit. Newsprint is typically printed on uncoated paper, so it doesn't have that quality, so expect the ink to bleed a little bit. So you want to be careful using really, really thin characters. Also, I think tomorrow morning is when we're going to get into designing for newspapers, but you want to be careful of reversing type. So yesterday we saw a couple of ads that had a color bar at the bottom, and we reversed the type and made it white instead of black. That's why we're saying we reversed it. You'd need a bold font anytime you do that, because there's so much ink in that one space, and the text being white, it would need to be quite thick to hold up so that you are ensured that whatever is in that color block is still legible. And if it's your URL, that's pretty daggum important. So we'll talk about some specific concerns for newsprint. But designing in black and white really lets us focus on the shape of the logo, the shape of the font that we've chosen, the message, without adding color into the mix, which at this point in the design process can be a little bit distracting. I also tend to start out with sketches, super rough thumbnail sketches. And I've got some examples here for you. I just use a graph pad of paper. Okay, and I'll show this around on the other side here in a second. And I just start out really, really rough with pencil drawings just to kind of get an idea. And then I move to the computer. So my sketches are really, really rough. So it's a great way for me just to kind of start out and see what won't work, so I can quickly eliminate a few possibilities if I don't like the look or if I don't like the shape that I'm seeing. Then I don't have to bother creating those on the computer. But to be quite honest, you can be very fast creating lots of different typographic logos on the computer. Now the graphic-based logos, that takes a whole lot more time, and I would definitely start out with sketches, and I would get the sketches pretty tight so that I knew what I was creating, because otherwise, first of all, you're going to be faster with pencil and paper. And I know some of the photographers out there are going, I don't draw. I'm not going to do this. It's fun. Because you're so fast at just little rough thumbnail sketches, you're going to be more creative. Things are going to come to you, ideas that won't come to you if you didn't have a pencil in your hand and a piece of paper underneath that. Ideas will come to you that you would have never come across on the computer. It's just a different medium, and it stimulates your brain in different ways. So that's what I always do. So we're going to add color to these guys here in a little bit and see what we can create from them. The third kind of logos that I want to talk about are logos that are mostly typographic in nature, but also have a graphic element. So we'll call those a little of both. This is a logo that I did for a large coaching company. So not really psychotherapy, but a little bit psychotherapy in base. So coaching people how to work together, so big corporations will bring in this company and they will teach all the employees how to work better as a team. Okay. So one idea that I came up with, again, starting out in black and white. So this was post thumbnail sketches on graph paper. And I use graph paper just because it's easy to kind of line things up. I prefer graph paper rather than paper that doesn't have any lines. So it's real handy. So we started out with the one on the left, and this is another idea. So once you get your logo, most of it typographically set, then you could be clever with the last word of it if you're using kind of like a type block. So this is another example of a stacking type, and it works so well because it's equal in width. So anytime you've got words that are kind of similar in length, they don't have to be exactly, but kind of similar in length, then you could experiment with this kind of treatment. It works very well. We've got contrast with the thinness of Kimura and the thickness of the weight of coaching. And then we've got contrast with the uppercase of center and the lowercase of Kimura, and the thinness of center versus the thickness of coaching. So what we did to kind of balance out or anchor that block of text, if you will, is to add a color block behind it and reverse the type. So we reversed it from black to white, and it really anchors that. And doesn't that black box to you make you feel like that company is a bit more solid, that it's going to be around, it's got a good base, it's strong? So that's another thing that you can do. So that adds a little bit of a graphical element. Another idea, and the one that they ended up going with, was the one on the right. So I couldn't believe it that the eye is so perfect to swap out for this little stick person, right? Because the eye with the dot on it, well, the stick person with the dot is the head. It works absolutely perfectly, and it even helps convey what the company is all about. It's obviously a company that is working with people. It's all about people. So if you can put a little graphic element in your logo as well, then it can oftentimes work extremely well. And that particular graphic is a built-in shape in Photoshop. Really. There's a slew of built-in shapes, and I'll show you how to find that. You have to load them. They're not all turned on or visible by default. So I'll show you how to turn that on. So this is a good example of adding a graphic element to a mostly typographic logo. That works very well. All of these would produce very well at small sizes. So that's also good. Here's another example. This is part of the new branding campaign that I did for our favorite restaurant on Pearl Street in Boulder. So I don't know if you've ever had this happen to you. If you haven't, you probably will have it happen now. Once you learn a few rules about typography and the way things are supposed to be versus the way a lot of things are when we see them, imagine going into your favorite restaurant over and over and over again and just being so appalled by the menus that you just can't take it anymore. That's what happened to me. So our favorite restaurant, we've gotten to be very good friends with the chef, and I just couldn't handle it. I said, Guillermo, I'm going to redo all of your visuals and your menus and your logo and everything because I just can't take it anymore. I mean, it was really, really kind of frustrating and upsetting because it was reflecting negatively on his business. I mean, it really was awful. And, you know, it's expensive to pay rent on Pearl Street in Boulder. It's the pedestrian mall, so there's a lot of foot traffic. So all the restaurants, you know, they want to be right there. And the rent is insane. It's like $10,000 a month. So you've got to be pulling in a lot of money to be able to pay your wait staff, pay all your cooks, pay all of that stuff, and remain open like that. And there's a lot of restaurants on that strip. So it made me sad that I didn't feel like he was bringing in the business that he could because his visuals were so bad. And I mean, awful. menus done in Word that had no alignment, Microsoft Word, just really terrible. So what we did was I sat down with him. He had me come out for lunch when it was real slow one day in the summertime. So I went in about 1:30. And this is also a great way to get free meals. Great tip here. I will never have to pay for anything at this restaurant again. So anyway, we sat down and I had my graph paper and I just started asking him some questions, So the owner and chef's name is Guillermo Casarubias, and he's Mexican, trained in France, cooking Italian food. So just try to wrap your brain around that. Anyway, he's very, very proud. And I started asking him, I was like, tell me why you're doing this. So just started asking him some questions. And before long, it came out that he makes everything fresh there. It's all homemade. Everything you get there. The pasta is homemade. His wife is the pastry chef. Everything is made there with love. And then I started asking him, well, why Italian? Why are you doing this? And why not Mexican food? Why not French food? And he said, Italian is just so rich and it's all about family, because in Italy, sitting down to a meal is a huge deal and it is a long affair in time, 2 or 3 hour thing. And so this family sense started coming out, and he loves feeding people, and he kept saying the word fresh. And so then I asked him, well, because he has some fairly simplistic items on his menu. Why are you doing that, Guillermo? Tell me a little bit about the items that you're offering. Well, I just want it to be approachable. It's not too heavy. It's stuff that you can eat every day. So I was listening and I was kind of writing down little notes that he was saying. Whatever I intuited that I needed to write down, I was writing down. And when I came home, I started looking at everything, and the word fresh just popped right out at me. The word every day just popped right out at me. So that's when I started to sit down and do some sketches. So we came up with this tagline for him that is very descriptive about what you're going to get should you choose to eat at this restaurant. Everyday Italian. So that makes it approachable, right? It's not, ooh, so filling, you can only eat here once a month. And then the other important thing to him, made fresh here. That's very important. That sends a really big message, and that sets him apart from Antica Roma, which is the other Italian restaurant that's on the next block, and Jay's Pasta, which is like a fast food Italian place. It's probably as Italian as Olive Garden. So that's the logic behind and the kind of the questions that I asked him to get to this point. So then what colors am I going to use? Start thinking about colors. Well, what's in the Italian flag? Red, white, and green. That's done. Next. So then I went into Font Explorer. We looked at that yesterday, font management software. I typed in Trattoria on Pearl, and then I just started tapping my down arrow key to go through everything. I knew I wanted a serif font because I wanted to give it that solid feeling with a base. He's solid. That restaurant's going to be there. It's not going to disappear in a month. And I wanted a rounded-based serif. So I found this font, and it worked perfectly. He loves sunflowers. The whole restaurant is decorated in sunflower paintings from a local artist that are quite beautiful. And sunflowers are kind of indicative of Italy. So I wanted to bring that in, something with a little color. So I found a piece of art that was the sunflower inside of it was an illustration, but it had a whole lot of other elements with it. So in Illustrator, I just picked out the face of the sunflower, and it had just a plethora of colors already in this piece of art. And you pop it onto the eye, and you've got a beautiful logo, at least what, in my humble opinion, is a beautiful logo. So we've done a whole new branding campaign with it. So his menus are all new, his signage is all new, business cards are all new. And that restaurant has a lot more business than it used to. And like I say, I'll never have to pay to eat there again. Yay. Just wait till I get my food photography business going in Boulder. I'll never have to pay to eat anywhere. And that's my goal.
So Lesa, I just wanted to pop in and say that we had a question a little bit earlier before you started talking about this from Benj Cooper from England. And he was like, is it ever too late to change your logo? And I think you just answered the question.
That's a great point. Thank you so much for asking that. It's never too late to change your logo. It's really not. It's really not in my opinion. okay? Your target audience may change, and just like people update their websites fairly frequently, feel free to update your logo. Give it a refresh, a fresh coat of paint, or fluff it up a little bit. So that is totally fine to do. Just when you do that, when you alter it, just make sure that you do update everywhere it appears so that you don't have two different versions out there, because that would be a bit confusing and send conflicting messages. Here's another example of a mostly typographic logo with a little bit of art. So digital camera conference, what's that big piece of art in the background? It's an aperture, right? Shutter. Pretty illustrative of what that company or that conference is going to be about. It's going to be about cameras. So on that note, do we have any questions from the audience or additional questions from the internet about what we've been talking about in logos so far, graphic-based and typographic-based?
Yeah, I have a question. In the graph where we had all your logos on one page.
Okay, so we'll go back to that.
In the contrast that we're pulling here, you're emphasizing, and you have so many logos that you've done it several different ways, where you've emphasized photography or you've emphasized Nelson. In doing that, I mean, Nelson isn't exactly Madonna, where you emphasize that one word and people would flock to you. But I assume if you're handing your card to somebody, they already know you're a photographer. How do you decide what emphasis you want to place? Is that as important as I think I'm making it be?
Not quite, but it's good that you're thinking that way. So what I would do if you're a photographer is find your 2 best images, and you're going to put that on the card at a large size. So it's going to be quite obvious what you do. So you pair the photo, which sends a message, right, along with one of these logos, and people are going to understand. It's going to be quite obvious that you're a photographer. So I would let the image speak louder. In this case, specifically for photographers or real estate agents, I would let the image speak louder than the logo itself. But they need to, go together, and we'll look at several examples of that. Yeah. So if you weren't going to use an image on your business card, and I'm not real sure why you wouldn't if you're a photographer, but let's say you don't want to, or if you really want to make a statement, you could put that logo at the top left on the front and then have, a couple of your prize-winning images on the back. How many would you put on the back? Either 1 or 3. Right? So that would be another way to do it. And if you did put the one at the top left on a business card on the front, a dead center, you're going to have a whole nother level of contrast because of the white space that's all around it. So it just depends on what kind of feeling and message that you want to send with it. Any other questions?
Yeah, and actually it's perfect that you're on this slide. A lot of questions specifically about this. So it's pretty clear that a lot of people were also watching yesterday because this question proves it. Let's see, we've got Henry's Photo Mom and Lena Regina asking about the vertical studio word there on the bottom left. And they're saying, yesterday she said no vertical type. Does she consider the word studio done vertically vertical type? Remember
it's not
yesterday?
Really. That's a great question, and I'm so glad that came up. It's not really vertical type, it's just rotated. So the type that we looked at yesterday was vertical. So had I done that, the S would have been on top, and then the U would have been underneath that, and the T, and then the U, and the D-I-O that way. This, to me, is just rotated horizontal type, okay? It works because it's paired with the other type that has not been rotated, and that carries the weight of it. Studio is an afterthought. That's not the most important piece of information. If you were doing this for a restaurant and it was Guillermo's Mexican food, if you rotated food, that's not the most important word. So it's okay if it takes the viewer's brain a little bit longer to read that. But again, this is rotated horizontal type, not true vertical type. But I'm glad that came up.
Okay, there are so many good questions. So a question from Adrian Farr, who's from England, and then Sam Cox also asked about, and people in the lounge were talking about, how do you pick one? So Adrian Farr says, if 80% of people you ask like your logo and find it easy enough to read, but 20% find it difficult to read or they don't like it, should you keep spending time trying to please everyone or just go with the majority? And then Sam asked, if you've come up with several candidate logos, how do you go about selecting the best one? Do you get help? Maybe pass it around and ask for help.
Great questions. Thank you for asking those. The person that you need to worry about pleasing is yourself. You're never going to be able to please anybody. It's never going to happen. And you'll drive yourself crazy trying to do so. But that's not to say that it's not useful to get some feedback. So I would ask close family and friends. But also do some tests yourself. Let's say you had several of these logos that you thought would work. Try them out. Do a little fake business card and print it on your own printer at home. Cut it out, stick it in your pocket, and walk around with it. Live with it for a week and see how you feel about it. But really, you are the one who started your company. If it's your company, it's you that you need to please. Only you know the kind of message and the feel that you want to send. You could also, let's say I was trying to pick myself between all of these logos. I might set this as my background screen on my computer and, live with it that way for a few days. Or have this on your screen and just walk around your studio and just kind of look at it from different angles. You will be drawn to a precious few of these at some point if you spend enough time looking at them. Okay, so I wouldn't worry so much about the 20% that is always going to fuss, because people always fuss. They like to fuss, so you can't please everybody. But print it out small. See how, if you're having trouble deciding between a couple of them, then you might see how they reproduce at small sizes to kind of help you narrow down the choice. One of them might be a little bit more legible at a small size than the other one, so that would also help you determine which one might work better for you, be a little bit more versatile. Any other questions?
Yes.
Yeah. A lot of
we have for questions. We have a ton
Yeah,
of
exactly.
questions.
Cool, we can go for a little
Okay,
while.
great.
Yeah.
Okay. E.G. Photography asks, is it possible to have a logo be fun and classy/expensive at the same time?
Absolutely, and in my opinion, the one at the top left does that. I think it's the roundness, the extreme roundness of it makes it very friendly and fun, I think, and it's also classy. Thin, so it's got that elegant feel going on. Anything that's thin has that elegant feel. So if you pair thin with round, you're good. So the one at the bottom right, to me, also feels like it could be a little bit more expensive. Yeah, so I'd say yeah. Just look for a font that's got a lot of roundness to it. And then go with Futura. Futura is fabulous. This is Futura Light. It's a great font. Can't go wrong with it.
So NL Design says, hello, this is Chris from New York City. I just wanted to tell Lesa or ask you what you think of buying stock art photo for your logo, if it's such a good idea when basically everyone can have your logo if they know where to get the stock from. And it kind of makes me wonder, even about fonts that everyone uses, how much effort do you put into being original versus just having a really good look?
That's a great question. I'm going to say something that's going to make y'all a little uncomfortable. I wouldn't worry about being original with your logo quite so much. Worry about being original with your photography. And you're going to put that big picture or two big pictures on your business card, and that is going to carry most of the weight. You want your logo to be clean and clear and legible. As far as using stock imagery as part of your logo, there is so much stock imagery that you know how hard somebody would have to work to try to find the exact piece of art that you may have used in your logo. So I wouldn't worry about that being used in the same space. And think about where you're advertising. Okay, most photographers, where are you trying to get clients from? It's a local situation. So the chances of another photographer in your geographic area coming across the same piece of art or using the same font, or even if they did use the font, you know they didn't watch this class, so your logo is going to look a lot better than theirs anyway. So I wouldn't worry about it so much. Now, on the part of the question regarding fonts that other people have access to and could be overused, what you do with these fonts is going to be unique. Okay, there's not a whole lot of people doing this kind of thing that you see on screen here. So what you do with it, it's going to have your own little personal individual spin on it, and or it may be unique in color. But these fonts, they work because they're tried and true, and they're really, really good. So I just wouldn't worry about coming across somebody else that used the same font in particular in your business, because that's not what's really, really important in this situation.
Cool. Perfect. Cool.
Yes, Bill?
You talked about roundness of the fonts and how that kind of is more playful and more approachable. Are there feelings about tall X heights that also yield some kind of meaning implicitly?
Yeah, we talked about X heights just a little bit yesterday. So in case you didn't tune in, an X height is referring to the vertical height of the big part of the letters. So for example, if we look at the logo at the top left in the word photography, the X height is the height of the O, okay? Or the round part of the G or the R or the A. Okay, it doesn't include the descender, and the descender is the little tail that's on the P, the G, the P, and the Y, or the ascender, which is the tall part of the H, or both H's rather, in photography. So X height is talking about the middle section, the meat of the letter form, if you will, or character. The bigger the X height is, the easier it is to read the font, and that's where the feeling of approachability comes from, is your brain's interpreting the ease of reading it that's transferred to the content. Just like if you use a font that you can't read, or you set your logo in some kind of crazy decorative thing that's incredibly difficult to read, then people will transfer that feeling to the content, to your studio or your business or whatever it is. So that's the main reason that the one at the top left looks so friendly, as well as the one at the bottom right, is because those have a little bit bigger X height. So just readability, really. Yeah. Does that help?
Yeah, you had mentioned about the readability yesterday. I guess I was trying to translate that into the sort of emotional feeling it might lend, and when you're doing it as a logo.
Yeah, just friendly, easy, approachable. Round things do that.
So there are a ton of really, really good questions. I'm just going to kind of bring up something that I'm seeing a lot of coming up in the chat rooms, which is people are wondering if you're available for critiquing their logos. So maybe we should talk about that right now, because I think we're going to get a lot of that today. So yeah, JJ22 wants to know if they can contact you for critique, and C. Welsh Photo is asking if there's a place where they can go. Maybe not you specifically, but is there a community out there that you think you can refer people to bounce ideas off of?
I'm not having a resource pop into my mind. Of course, you're welcome to email me. Do understand I get about 1,000 emails a day, and so I can't oftentimes get back to you as quickly as you may need to. I do have a little donation button on my website, photolesa.com, and if you were to make a $5 donation or something like that, then I'd be happy to look at your logo. But I don't have a whole lot of free time, so I can't just do endless critiques, unfortunately, because you guys wouldn't work for free, would you?
There you go.
So, yeah.
Okay, yep, just thought we should mention that.
The thing about, so I'm hearing this question come up, in a few different ways, is extreme concern about what everybody else thinks. I really wouldn't go down that rabbit hole quite so much. It obviously needs to be legible, and it needs to send the right message. If you feel like it's legible and you feel like it sends the right message, and you have put into practice the principles that we looked at yesterday, and that is contrast, repetition, alignment, proximity. Okay, otherwise your designs are going to look like what? C-R-A-P. If you've put those into practice, as well as the typographic do's and don'ts that we looked at yesterday, you're going to come up with something nice. If it looks remotely like any of these examples that I've got here, and this is by no means the only things that you could do with these fonts. I mean, it's endless. I mean, because there's a bazillion fonts out there in the wild. I think it's going to look good. So Pass it around your immediate, your trusted circle of friends and family. The problem with putting something like this up on the internet is people will be so incredibly mean to you, you will not even believe it. You just will not even believe how incredibly mean people will be online because it's an anonymous situation. So if you can take that kind of feedback, the feedback that you're going to get from your trusted circle of friends and family is going to be critical feedback because those people care about you and they want you to succeed. You cannot say that about anonymous people on the internet, as awful as that is to point out. So I would never put something up on the internet and ask for feedback on it like that because I'm not sure that what you get back is going to be useful.
Well, like she said, we have a ton of questions, but I think we're ready to move on. We could sit and ask you questions for another hour.
So let's pop over into Photoshop, and I'm just going to use Photoshop because I know most photographers have that. The techniques that I'm going to be using, like I pointed out yesterday, as far as formatting, are exactly the same in Illustrator and InDesign. So let's pop on over to those programs and let's create a few of these guys. And we're not going to worry about adding color just yet. When we come back from break here pretty soon, then we're going to dive into some color theory. And we're not going to go too deeply into it, but we're going to go into it deep enough where you'll be able to pick a color palette that works well together and sends the message that you want to attract the clients that you're trying to get. And again, that doesn't necessarily mean that's the clients you currently have. We're targeting the clients we want, so spend some time thinking about that. So let's pop out of this right here. And again, if you purchase the course, you're going to get all of these files in their wonderful, editable goodness.
Can you explain that a little bit more, what you mean by that?
I would love to. So what I'm going to do is I've prepared a bunch of files for you. So we'll just start out with the custom text logo that we made for our opposite of Transformers movie, The Maintainers. So when I say editable goodness, I'll zoom in here to my layers panel so you can see it. You're going to get the editable file. So all of these files are layered. So you're going to be able to reverse engineer what I've done. So for example, here you can see that I've got a solid color background layer going on. Okay, here we are in Photoshop, and I'll expand my layers panel just a touch so we can talk about what we've got here. At the bottom of the layers panel, we've got a solid color fill layer. That's where our black background is going on. Above it, we've got a text layer that is turned off at the moment, so it's not visible. The reason you have that is because that's the original text that I started out with so that you can see what I started out with. So if I turn all the other layers off and I turn this one on, I'm going to do that with a keyboard shortcut, and it's Option on a Mac or Alt on a PC. Hold down that modifier key, and if you click the little visibility icon to the left of the layer, that will toggle all the rest of them off and only leave on the one that you Option or Alt clicked on. So that's a nice little tip for you. So if I zoom back out, you can see the original text that I started out with. And you can double click it to see what font I used. You could see up here at the top left that this is Stone Sans ITC. And if you don't have that font, you will get an error message saying, hey, we can't find that font on your system. It's going to be substituted. But you don't have to substitute it. If you don't edit it, it'll still open and look nice. So you could at least, if you wanted to go find and purchase that font, then you'd know what the heck it was. But this is really just to illustrate how this is done so that you can do it yourself. So I always try to provide quite a few exercise files. So we've got a bunch that are downloadable for today and tomorrow. And I do encourage you to keep those hanging around. So if you open up these layered files and you play around with it, just don't save over that file, because it would be good if you kept these, because if you forget a little something or you're trying to do this technique yourself and it's not quite working out, then you can go back to my files and you can figure out if you missed a step. So what we've got here is just a word in all caps, the maintainers. Okay, so I'll zoom in just a little bit more. So what we're going to do now is we're going to convert that text into outlines. And you can also do this in Illustrator. On the next example, we'll use Illustrator so you can see how you can do it there. Photoshop text used to print out really terribly because it wasn't truly vector in nature. Vector meaning it's based on points and paths, so it won't pixelate if you increase its size. But Photoshop text has been vector for several versions, so doing it here is the equivalent of doing it in Illustrator. So if you're more comfortable in one program over the other one, that's pretty much the same. So what we're going to do is we're going to create outlines out of this text. So we're going to trot up to the Type menu. Now the Type menu is new in CS6, so if you're running CS5, you're not going to have this menu, but the same option is going to appear in the Layer menu. Okay, so if CS5 and earlier, look in the Layer menu. CS6, look in the Type menu. So we're going to come down to the Convert to Shape option, and watch what happens on my screen to my text when I do this. Okay. Oops. I meant to show you the Layers panel. There we go. So Photoshop created a vector layer out of that text. Okay, so if you're doing this at home, you'd want to duplicate that type layer first because you want to be able to get back to it. So I missed that step. So let's undo by pressing Command-Z on a Mac or Control-Z on a PC, and let's go ahead and duplicate that layer. And it's easy to duplicate a layer in Photoshop. Just press Command-J. I think of that as for jump. I'm going to jump this content onto another layer. Control-J on a PC. So let's go ahead and do that. Now we've got our text still fully editable, because when you turn it into art or you turn it into outlines, you lose the ability to edit it. So I'm a little bit lazy, so I like to duplicate that layer so I don't have to retype it again. Not that it would take me long to type maintainers, but anyway. So we'll go ahead and do that again. So we'll trot back up to the Type menu in CS6 or the Layer menu in earlier versions, and we're going to tell Photoshop to convert it to a shape. And over here in our Layers panel, we can see that Photoshop did indeed create a vector out of our text. And we know it's a vector because it has that special little icon on it, which is indicating that the contents of this layer is now made from points and paths in between the points, which gives it the infinite scalability without the edges getting all pixelated. So now what we can do is use Photoshop's vector editing tools to change it up, okay? So what we can do is come over here to the Tools panel, and we're going to grab the Direct Selection tool, okay? It's the white arrow, so just look down your Tools panel in Photoshop till you find the T for the text layer, and the vector tools are underneath that. So you want the little white arrow, not the dark arrow, and I'll zoom in so you can see that a little bit. So you want this guy right here, the Direct Selection tool. So if you click and hold your mouse button on these tools that have that tiny little triangle to the bottom right, that lets you know that there's other tools hidden inside that tool set. So just hold down your mouse button and that little menu will appear, and then you can just choose Direct Selection. So now we're going to come up here, I'll zoom back out, and I'm going to zoom into the text only so we can see. And I'm pressing Command plus or Control plus to zoom in. So if I click on the bottom portion of that M, see how now I've got points and paths? So what I can do is I can click and drag. I'm going to hold my Shift key down because I don't want to swing the M around. I want to constrain my drag to be perfectly vertical, okay? I'm just going to click and pull it down. There we go. Now I'm going to scoot over, and now we're going to scroll till we get to the T right here, and I'm going to click, and then click and drag while holding the Shift key downward. Okay, now the other thing, I'll zoom back out so you can see what we've got so far. There we go. So as I'm clicking with that tool, I'm able to edit a piece of the letter form. Okay, so I could do that with the N too if I wanted, or maybe the R, space it out a little bit. So let's grab the R, oops. hold down the shift key because you don't want to have that going on. You want the letter to still be recognizable as what it is. And then just pull it down like that. You can also space these guys out. The reason we're using the, and I'll zoom back out so you can see the tools panel. I'll zoom back out so you can see the tools panel. There we go. The reason we're using the direct selection tool instead of the path selection tool is that the path selection tool is going to grab the whole letter. So if I zoom back in a little bit. For example, if I click the T with the path selection tool, then I can affect the whole letter. But in extending that piece of the letter form, or character rather, I only want to affect one little piece of it. So to grab one little piece of it, you need to use the other arrow tool, the direct selection tool. That lets you affect just one part of it instead of the whole thing. Okay, so path selection tool, if you want to grab the whole letter and let's say move it around, you know, if you want to create a little bit of a stacking effect, which would be terribly hard to read. But for this one, I could use that path selection tool to select the whole path and then scoot it around. So since I've turned this type into outlines, or into a shape rather, I can't kern it like we did yesterday with the kerning controls, because the kerning controls only work with editable text. So this has ceased to be editable text at this point. So you could adjust the spacing between the letters by using the path selection tool and just tapping the arrow keys on your keyboard. Okay, so like the S is much too close to the R, so I could space that out. But again, to alter the letter forms themselves or a piece of them, then you need to grab the direct selection tool. Now the other thing that we can do to make this look more like the Transformers logo is we need to grab this little corner of the new descenders that we made, and we need to drag it inward a little bit so that it makes an angle out of that part. So let's go ahead and zoom in a little bit more to our R here, since we're over on that side of the logo anyway. So again, with our direct selection tool, okay, the white arrow, we're going to click that corner point and then just drag it inward a little bit, or drag it up rather, so that it forms an angle. Okay, so we'll scoot over and we'll do that on the other descenders that we made. There we go. So I'm just going to click the corner point and drag it upward. And you could press and hold the shift key on this one as well to keep from making it thinner, unless that's the look that you're going for. Okay, so if you shift drag, then you can't alter it. You'd have to try really hard and move your mouse a whole lot to be able to alter the width of it, okay? So that's all that the designers did. Can you imagine getting that job? Can you imagine how much the designer got paid for that Transformers logo, and this is all they did? That is working smarter, not harder. So this is another option for you. Oops. So, okay, I did this on purpose, she says. Oh, that grid is terrible. Okay, so what happened here is I grabbed hold of the control handle instead of the actual point. So that's why I'm getting this curve situation going on right here. But that could be an interesting thing too. I'll go ahead and press Command Z or Control Z on a PC to undo that move. That lets me undo the last thing that I did, but if I add the Option key or Alt to that combination, I get about 25 levels of undo. Okay, so Command Option Z on a Mac, Control Alt Z on a PC, and that lets you keep stepping back for however long you hold down those modifier keys and keep tapping the Z key on your keyboard. It's really a keyboard shortcut for step backward in your history panel. That's all it is. So here again, we've still got the direct selection tool active, and we're just going to click on that point and press and hold our shift key to drag it straight up, and then we've got that slant. Pretty amazing, huh? The last thing I did, and we'll do this all again together. The last thing I did was go grab some texture. This one is from Fotolia. So I'll go ahead and use our Option or Alt clicking the visibility eye trick to turn off everything else and turn on the texture so you can see it. And now we can't see it for some reason. Oh, because it's clipped to the other one. Okay, there we go. There's the texture that I found on Fotolia. and I shoved through our transformers text. Now this is something that we're gonna do a couple of more times later in the afternoon. So I'll just go ahead and undo what I did. There we go. So I brought in that texture and I shoved it through my newly custom text that we made here. And I did that by simply grouping those two layers together. So I'll undo it again so you can see what I did. So all I did was bring in the texture, place it above the item that you want to shove it through. This is how you place photo inside of a text. Or any shape, a brush stroke, it could be anything. So you just want to pay attention to your layer stacking order. Make sure the texture or the photo that you want to push through the shape is above the shape layer. Okay. And then all you have to do is press and hold the Option key on a Mac or Alt on a PC. And when you do, and you point your cursor at that dividing line between those two layers, see how it changes to a square with a little down pointing arrow? That lets you know that should you click while that icon is visible, that whatever is on that layer is going to be pushed through the shape of whatever is on the layer underneath it, whether it's text, whether it's a vector layer as we have here, or if it's a brush stroke on a transparent layer, it's going to be shoved through it. In CS5 and earlier, that icon is two intersecting circles. They changed it to be a little bit more illustrative of what's going to occur in CS6, which is nice. As soon as you click on the dividing line between those two layers, again, we're holding down the Option key on a Mac or Alt on a PC, then the layer itself scoots over to the right and you get a downward pointing arrow right here on the left side of it that lets you know that, hey, I am clipped to or grouped to, connected to, attached to what's underneath me. That's what's going on here. And to liberate whatever is on this layer so that it is not shoved through the shape of whatever's on the layer below, then you just do the exact same thing again. Hold down Option on a Mac or Alt on a PC, and this time when you point your cursor at that dividing line between the two layers, you get a little slash through the arrow that lets you know, hey, you're fixing to unclip or ungroup this from the other layer. So you just give it a click, and then it pops back over to the other side. And then last but not least, you can see here that I added a layer effect or a layer style. I added a stroke just to kind of finish off the letter forms, because there are some parts of that pattern that are pretty light or pretty dark rather in nature. And we talked about that a little bit yesterday, is if you're putting texture or a photo into text, if part of that texture or photo is similar to the background color, it can leave the letter form looking like it's open. So I'll just turn off the stroke here. So see how some parts of that S kind of disappear because the background is similar in color to that piece of the texture. That's why I like to add a stroke when I do this. So it just finishes off those letter forms so they don't feel like they're open and like, this is awful, bleeding out. Oh, it's terrible. But when I do that, I will decrease the opacity quite a bit of that stroke, just so it's subtle, just enough to kind of finish off those letter forms. You can see here that I've lowered the stroke to about 50% or so. So it's a thin stroke and it's quite see-through, so that's why it works. So let's take a look at this one more time. So it's a handy one. I highly recommend doing this. You know, you're sitting at home, whatever, just play. Type your name in a font, turn it into an outline, and just start grabbing it and pull it around. Interesting things will happen. Okay, so let's turn off these layers that I made for you, and let's go ahead and delete the extra layer that I made a moment ago so that we're back to our original text. Now what are we going to do? The first thing we're going to do is duplicate that type layer because we're lazy. We don't want to have to retype it or remember what font we started out with. So let's press Command-J on a Mac or Control-J on a PC, and then let's turn off the visibility eye of the original editable text layer. Now with the copy active, we're going to trot up to the Type menu in CS6 or the Layers menu in earlier versions. And then we're going to choose Convert to Shape. And that is going to turn all of our text into an outline. It may be hard to see on screen, but as soon as you do that, Photoshop puts a thin gray outline all the way around the text. I'll zoom in so you can see it. You can kind of see it here on the end. And that's just letting you know, hey, this is a path. That doesn't print, so don't worry about it. You cannot get rid of it if you try to get rid of it. It's just Photoshop's way of letting you know that that's a path. So now we can scoot over to one of the letters that we want to alter. So we'll start with the M, and we want to go down toward the bottom, like the bottom third of your tools panel, to where you see an arrow. And if you've not used these tools before, you'll likely see the black arrow. So I'll zoom in just a little bit so you can see that. This guy right here on the left. Click and hold down on that icon and choose Direct Selection Tool. Now we're going to come up to the area that we want to change. So just give it a click. Hold down your Shift key and then grab the portion that you want to alter. So if we wanted to, we could grab this part of the M and do something completely different. So it's very, very easy to edit text in this way. Okay, so I'll undo that by pressing Command Z, and we'll make it look like the Transformers logo again. Actually, I'll grab this part of the M, bring it down. Now, if I was doing this for real, I would probably turn on my rulers in Photoshop, and I would drag a guide down, so that way I would make each of these newly enhanced descenders even horizontally. Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead and grab the point at the bottom right, hold down the Shift key again, and we're going to drag it up to create that angle. So now let's come over here to the T. So we're going to give it a click, press and hold the Shift key, and then click and drag down. And then we're going to click that right bottom point, hold down the Shift key, and again, that's just constraining our drag to be perfectly vertical or horizontal, whichever direction we're dragging it. And pull it up, and now let's zoom back out and see what we've got. Command or Control minus. Let's say we like the look of that. So now we can come over here and start spacing those letters out. So we could grab the Path Selection tool, because to do spacing, we want to grab the whole path. So then we can click to activate our M and just use our arrow keys on our keyboard to space out these letters so that they're not crashing into each other, unless you want them to crash into each other. So let's click and move the T over a little bit, move the I over a little bit. There we go, let's call that good. Then the last thing that we did was we brought in some texture, and I've provided that file for you. So let's go ahead and place that like you would if you were doing this for real. So you go up to the File menu, choose Place, and then you would navigate to where the file lives. These files that we're working with right now are in the Logos folder, and it looks like I lied to you. It looks like I didn't actually give you that texture file. So sorry about that. But we're here, we would just be able to click and drag it in. I'll go one more place and see if I happen to include it. I did not. Okay, so you would just place whatever texture file you want. Let's pretend like this one just came right in. Okay, so let's pretend it came in right above our text layer. If it didn't, just make sure that the texture file is above the text layer, because whatever you want to push through the type has to be on a layer above it, not below, or it won't work at all. So here we go. So let's say the texture just came in. And now let's hold down our Option key on a Mac or Alt on a PC and point your cursor at the dividing line between those two layers and give it a swift click. And the texture comes right through the type. Now, if you wanted to resize the texture, you can. So we just summon our free transform tool. So we could trot up to the Edit menu and choose free transform, or just use its keyboard shortcut, which is Command T on a Mac or Control T on a PC. And now we've got our transform handles around that texture, because we want to make it a little bit smaller, because the texture is a little bit too large inside the letters right now. But arguably it's hard to grab those corner handles if you cannot see them. So this is a fabulous keyboard shortcut for you. So if you don't remember anything else about today, this will make it worth the money. Is Command 0 on a Mac or Control 0 on a PC, and Photoshop will resize your artwork just enough so that you can see all 4 corner handles so that you can grab them. So now I'm going to resize this texture. I want to keep it proportional, so I want to preserve the aspect ratio by pressing and holding the Shift key. And then I want to resize from the center point so that all 4 of my corner handles are going in at the same time. And you can do that by pressing and holding the Option key on a Mac or Alt on a PC. So I'm holding down Shift Option on a Mac or Shift Alt on a PC. And then we're just going to grab any corner handle and drag it inward to make that a little bit smaller. And then I'll release the modifier keys and move it over a little bit. Press Return when you're finished. And then you can press Command 0 or Control 0 on a PC again, and Photoshop will resize the screen once more. And that's just the keyboard shortcut for choosing View, Fit on Screen. That's all. But that's the easy one to remember. There you go. And then the last thing that we did was add a stroke. So let's go ahead and do that by clicking the tiny little effects button at the bottom of the layers panel. Choose stroke. Now if you're using CS6, you will notice that these items in this layer styles or effects menu have been rearranged. So if the order on my screen is different than the order on your screen, don't let that throw you. That's just, they rearranged them in CS6. So go ahead and choose stroke. And now what we could do is zoom into our image just a little bit, and for stroke color, we could pick up a color that already exists in the texture. Okay, so I'd go down in stroke size, I'd make it pretty small, maybe 2 or so. And then to change the color, let's go ahead and click the little color wheel, which opens the color picker. But if you mouse away from an open color picker, then you can steal any color that lives in your image. Okay, so I might pick up one of these lighter blue colors or something like that. Click OK, and then let's drop the opacity down quite a bit to maybe 50% or so. And I'm not seeing that show up on my text layer. Why? Because I had the texture layer active when I added that. So all you have to do is click and drag the stroke down to the layer you actually want to apply it to, if that happens to you. A lot of people don't know that those layer styles, you can drag them from one layer to another. You just click and drag on the name themselves, or the name itself. You can also copy them between layers. So to copy this stroke to another layer, I would just hold down the Option key on a Mac or Alt on a PC, and then drag that stroke to the other layer that I wanted to add it to. And that way you can be assured that you're, let's say you had a second word that you were doing this effect to, you would be assured that the stroke is exactly the same, has the same attributes as the original one.